In our ongoing series of interviews with author and co-authors of Embraced by the Divine, we are pleased this week to welcome to Soul, Jess Ann Nichols George. We're really, really grateful for your time.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and thank you so much for, inviting me to do this. This is wonderful.
Well, we were quite blessed to meet Michelle a couple of months ago, and she's put us in contact with some wonderful people from the book in particular, you included, and it's been a great privilege for us to be meeting you all.
It's been such a great journey to be a part of that with Michelle, and really, she's probably about the only person that I would have considered doing a collaborative effort with like that. Because I had turned down, doing things with several other people, and since doing that have turned down doing things with other people. But she's, she's really an amazing person to work with, and she's always going to put her heart and soul into what she does.
So that was the main reason that you got involved, was the fact that she is such an incredible person? Yeah, really it was, because of her personality. Like I said, I know she'll follow through on things. I know that she takes care of things and handles things. So there was never any doubt in my mind about there being all kinds of issues involved. And when it started off as a very small project, which was great, because I was like, I don't have this to put in it. I don't have that to put into it. So I can't, jump into something that's going to require all these big commitments and things. And, of course, it turned in to be much bigger than we were all anticipating, I think. And it's been interesting to watch people who have done a lot of collaborative aspects, that have been a part of the book. And they said never have they seen success with anything like they've seen with this one. Yes, it's been quite incredible, hasn't it? I remember from the first time Michelle sat down with us and talked about how it sort of went viral literally overnight. It's quite an incredible story, really.
Well, and it's fun because she brought me in, and I had a chance to really work with her through the type of work that I do in coding interpretation and alignment, and to see all of the pieces come together, because I can do the one side of it and give her the right way to align it, but she had to still take all the, traditional steps to put it out there and make it happen and do all of that follow through. And it just shows what can happen when you do bring all of those pieces together.
I wanted to mention, I love the way your chapter in the book begins, where you start talking about how people regret those things that they, with hindsight, look back on and feel like, oh, damn, I should have gone left instead of right, or, those sorts of self-recriminations. Wonderful way of opening up the book. Do you still feel that you look back and have those recriminations still to this day?
I've always been a person, Steve, that has lived with no regrets. And it's a very interesting thing, because we can very easily get wrapped up in that pattern of wishing I'd done this or wishing I'd done that. The fact of the matter is that time has passed, and we're not going to be able to go back and change that so much. I mean, certainly, I suppose there's metaphysical ways to do that. We want to go down that journey. But I really find that, it's about learning from those experiences so that we don't keep repeating those patterns. And as we make that shift, in there, I feel that when we come to that understanding that we are all operating from the best that we can at any given moment, and there's certainly days that we say, oh, I should have given a little more, or I should have done that, or things like that. But in that moment, in the knowledge we had to work with in that moment and that time, we were giving our best, and we do at every moment. And I think that that's a powerful thing. I have been through a lot of different experiences in my life that very easily could have placed me in a victim space. And that includes, for example, 7 date rapes in 1 year of my life.
Wow.
And I could have laid down, I could have called up Oprah and said, hey, you know, I've got a story for you here. But I didn't, because I deliberately said to myself, I'm not going to play that role.
Yeah.
And just because society says I should be hurting doesn't mean I have to hurt. So that has been my philosophy, and I've used it even when I was in college. I remember we had this experiment in one of my classes. It was one of my, I think, senior level classes. And it was pretty funny because the teacher all year long had been trying to find an exercise that I had never done before. Literally spent the whole semester, and this was a teacher. He didn't like large classes. He did his best to scare everybody out of the class. You know, right up front. And when you got a class full of seniors that have to have it to graduate, it doesn't work well. He finally comes up with this experiment that's kind of like this trial run. And you're supposed to be like a group of people being held hostage on a crashed airline, you know, somewhere.
Yep.
And say, okay, everybody can go free except for one person. And whoever that person is that stays will probably be killed by the hijackers. And so they turn off all the lights, and the people running the groups, you know, or the exercise, they have these flashlights, and they're supposed to, you know, be creating this drama and everything. And and so, you know, my group sits there, they look around, and I go, well, I volunteer to stay. And they go, okay. They all raise their hand, goes, we're done. And the teacher comes over, and he's just fuming, you know, and he's just fuming. And he's like, you can't be done. You told me you didn't ever do this exercise. I said, I haven't. They go, how can you be done? You know, and the whole group goes, well, she volunteered to stay, and we said, okay. And so then they made us spend the rest of the class talking about why I was okay with staying and letting everybody go. And I simply said, well, you know, the thing is I have no regrets. I don't feel like I have to go out and do something else in the world. I mean, sure, if I live, I would, but you know, if I don't, I've lived a great life. And so it's kind of interesting. I think I've just always carried that philosophy through in life. So that's what.
just out of curiosity, I'm just pondering now. Humans in general tend to be predilected towards having regrets. I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on why do you think we are, if you like, a bit obsessed with regrets? Where do you think that comes from?
I really feel, Steve, that obsession with regrets comes from not feeling good enough, not feeling worthy enough in the world. It comes from living by other people's opinions and judgments. And when we learn to be compassionate with ourselves, when we learn to be okay with our choices, then we can step away from that. But I think that obsession is because people are constantly seeking approval from other people. Am I good enough? Did you like what I did? Did you know? And you can worry those things, and we're programmed in that way from very, very young, right? You've got to behave a certain way in public. You've got to dress a certain way. You've got to do this. You've got to do that. And so I think holding that strong sense of wrong and right in their lives, and viewing things in these terms of good and bad, and the world just continues to perpetuate that as we grow up and we go through life, and the programming gets stronger, and you know, we watch movies and we watch TV and we watch all these things, and it perpetuates that good versus evil theme.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people, they don't have the examples, and they're not shown what to do if they're so-called good. You know, they know what to do if they're bad. They know they can get attention that way, right? The screaming child tends to get more attention than the quiet one.
Yes.
Does. And so I think that's that more comfortable known factor. So it's almost like people have to have something to complain about in order to have a conversation, in a sense.
It's interesting. I was watching with my partner Patricia just recently of all things, a making of Star Trek Next Generation TV series. And a very interesting point was made, which is relevant at this time. They were saying that the creator of Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry, had wanted the next generation to be a very utopian society where everyone got along and everything was wonderful and we'd gotten past all of our issues. And so in the first couple of seasons they tried to do that, and they were going through writer after writer after writer because they didn't know how to write for happiness. They didn't know how to write for peace and utopia. All they knew is how to write for struggle and drama. And so after 2 seasons of the show almost failing, they had to bring in new writers to write with drama and to create situations to make the thing float, which says a lot about the way we are programmed, that we expect to see the good guy and the bad guy. We expect to see some sort of conflict and to see that conflict resolved in some way. It's quite interesting, isn't it?
It's very interesting, and even if you look at the very nature of human existence, it's kind of interesting. I've been doing some exploration on ice caves, ancient ice age, and the caves, and it actually goes back, when you talk about evolution, into the factor of some of the ice age periods in our history of Earth were going on before humans evolved, before we came into this this way that we are.
Yes.
And a division. And it was like, I forget what they refer to it, but if it's like one cellular or something, and then humans go into like a 2 cellular type of thing. And so there's literally a division. And I was thinking to myself, I think we're regressing. And every technology we bring in, we're actually regressing. Because, you know, when it was this one thing, it was, you know, it was unity, it was harmony, it fed itself, it didn't have to, you know, take anything, it just photosynthesis kind of process. And I'm finding it really fascinating to do some of this research and exploration in this right now, because of my strong connections in the Nordic cultures and things like that.
Right.
And so yeah, it's very interesting. But what you're bringing up is exactly true. To ask somebody to sit and be still, to not make a judgment on something, it's a whole different way of thinking that we just don't have examples for.
Yes, exactly, yeah. It's like the writers are saying, you know, well, what story do we tell? You know, how do we tell a story about people to really happy and get along well? No one's going to watch, you know. It's bizarre, isn't it? Talking about programming, I noticed that in the book you talk about your journey through some very serious health issues there. One of the things you're trying not to regret, because we're not having regrets anymore, is the whole fact that there was a voice talking to you in the early days saying, don't listen to the doctors, don't follow that programming that we have that says you must believe what you're told by the authority figure. And you didn't follow that voice, and it led to a whole lot of issues. Where do you stand on the programming of society in those traditional ways now?
You know, it's very interesting because, you know, what happened early on is that I kept trying to tell the doctors there's something wrong. You know, there's something more going on here. And the healthcare system that I had at the time, they weren't going to cover it. You know, the doctor said, well, you're not far enough out of the normal range. They're not going to cover it, so that's the way it is. We're not going to do anymore. And, you know, I kind of let it all go, and I had a lot of other things going on in my life. And, you know, I think like a lot of people, I wrote a lot of stuff off to stress and tension and, you know, life changes and, and different things. And when everything came up years later, here again, I kind of was dealing. They run under these heavy programmings of, let's put you on some medications. Oh, you're just, you don't know what you're talking about. And, here again, reinforcing this not good enough kind of pattern.
Yes.
And wanting to keep you in this drugged out space that you can't really think for yourself. And so I had to take a lot of it into my own hands. And yes, by the time I could actually get people to listen to me, which I had spent a good 2 solid years of going from doctor to doctor to doctor saying, please listen to me. There's something wrong. All these health issues had cascaded to this humongous point that, as you noticed in the book, eventually led to having 2 specialists who were top of their field. One of them has interns lined up for 5 years to intern with her. And they sign up when they go into medical school to intern. The other one was in the top 30 specialist in the country, and for these types of procedures, and they ended up operating 6 or 7 surgeries over a course of 6.5 hours. They wouldn't even allow an operation without me signing a living will, because I was at that point. My parents weren't sure I was going to live. They drove from out of state to come and be with me. And I stand by, doctors don't know everything. I don't have regrets. I wish I understood things more at that time, but I didn't have the knowledge base. And there was a lot of things when things were first going wrong, the information wasn't there to get. So I went through some scary things. I went through not knowing from day to day, was I going to be able to walk? Could I get out of bed? Was I ever going to be able to drive again? Was my whole life going to be gone? Was I going to live my life in a wheelchair? And I took a lot of stuff into my own hands to, again, coming back to that, I'm not going to be a victim pattern. I'm going to give it every chance I can give it. And if I still end up there, then that's where I end up. But I don't have regrets for the path that I took. I'm glad that I actually made the choices that I did make along the way, even though it was a long journey. Even though I went through a lot of shock when I did get people realizing what was happening. There's nothing like walking into a doctor's office and having them go, there's no reason for you to be alive medically. Yeah. You should have died years ago. There's no reason for you to be here.
I was actually going to ask about that. I was wondering, they're saying medically there's no reason for you to be alive, that you're literally the walking dead. Is it the strong will to live, to be here, feeling that you still have a purpose that was driving you forward, do you think?
It seems like throughout my life, I've had multiple times I've lived when I shouldn't, as they would say. We think about that purpose-driven life, and I think I go round and round with that a lot of times between, a whole variety of things. But obviously, I think that there is purpose in some of these things. I remember going into that doctor, and I thought, oh, great, here's another doctor. Nothing's going to show up in the test, and he's going to come back and say it's just in your head again, which that wasn't the response. The response was you should have been dead by now. And I think for me, it was such a wake-up call to, one, realize that maybe there's other people that will benefit from what I've gone through and be able to learn from it. Maybe the doctors will be able to learn, and they did. I was very, very fortunate that I had doctors towards the end of all of this that did listen, that did take heed to the dietary things that I was doing, the nutritional choices that I was making. And I had doctors that came back and said, how on earth did you ever figure this out about yourself?
Yeah.
I said, well, when you're landing in the hospital unable to breathe, you do what you can to figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. I noticed in the book that you refer to out-of-body experiences while you were going through certain procedures there. I'm wondering, A, did you share that with the doctors, and B, what was their reaction if you did?
I didn't get into sharing that with the doctors. That was not something I brought up with them. But I think some of just the basic, like I said, nutritional things I did, the things that I knew they could take hold of.
Yeah.
And those things did open a lot of doors. I knew I was just pretty much gone. Well, I've left the body more than once. I've had a few of those experiences over the years. And, I've just learned they're just catalysts. They're like chapters in a book. And when you come back, you've got some different perspectives and some different outlooks on life. And I think the shock for me, like even finding out the news before going out of body and not being certain if I was coming back, I don't do well with anesthesia. I had some preliminary surgery done before all the major surgery, and they did anesthesia through an IV type of thing.
Yeah.
Or a shot. They couldn't get me to come out of it. It was a real problem. So when they did all the major surgery, they had to use gas so they could bring me right out if they needed to. It's one of those things that you never are going to be the same.
Yeah.
Once you go through it, it really is this huge shift that happens from that time. And I think carrying away this point that you got to live for today. You've got to maximize today. You've got to, what can you do with it? And a lot of people think bucket list, and they go off and try to do that. And for me, it was like, okay, first of all, the budget wasn't there to go do a bucket list and jump all around the world. So for me, it came around to, how do I make everyday life incredible?
Yeah.
How do I do that? Because that's what's really going to count. And I think when you go through these things, it's such a big wake-up call to realizing the magnificence that we have in everyday life. And that's an important thing, because as you were mentioning earlier, there's so many people that feel like, oh, I would be bored if I sat and did nothing, or I had no work, or, like they don't know what to do. And yet, the more you come into these various experiences, or the more I've gone through these various experiences, the more I can just sit and do nothing and feel that magnificence. And it's an amazing experience to me.
I think from my own experience, I know I really enjoy meditating and reflecting on things. And people say to me sometimes, how can you sit there doing nothing? And to me, it's not nothing. I find that it's a very active time. It's just not physically active. It's active in the mind and in the soul. And so there's no time during that where I feel bored at all, because I feel like I'm actually being very active, very creative,
I think that's a great way to put it, because there's so much that you're experiencing during that stillness. And that's a powerful place to be, that those experiences, those insights that are flowing through, that connection with everything in the universe is, and that kind of comes back to the magnificence. You start to realize this, and I'm one of those people that have meditated all my life. It's always been a fairly easy thing for me to do.
Yeah.
It took practice, learning, but it's always been a fairly easy thing to do. And I think of all the people that go out and take drugs to try to get the state I just always go into in a very natural way. And, I think that's that piece. There is just so much to explore out there, and there's so much to experience. There's just so much that you feel. I can't, like I said, I just can't ever be bored by the smallest of things anymore.
Indeed. I would like to ask a bit about your coding work. I don't know much about that. Could you let us know what that's about?
Oh boy, this is.
Have I just opened Pandora's box? Or
You might have. How much time do we have? Coding interpretation has been an incredible thing for me to open up. I have delved into so many different areas of spiritual practices and belief systems over the years. And I have a huge family background, going back at least 13 generations on both sides of my family, one side being healers and intuitives and spiritual advisor type people, and on the other side being more of what we call a druidic base, or a base of people that operate by the seasons and nature and that type of thing, the elements and things like that.
What people usually call natural time people now.
Natural time, okay. And so over the years, I've had stuff, that I've worked with, and eventually what came about is a few years back, I kept getting these things dropping in my lap about names and numerology. Well, I've worked with both of these types of things in the past, but it kept coming through, and I said, there's something here I'm supposed to be working with. There's something here I'm supposed to be connecting with. And in that process, I wasn't quite sure where all it was going, but all the traditional methods weren't really coming together for me. It was like, it only kind of sort of hits. It's just not coming into that precision that I like, that's really giving me that accuracy. Well, what happened was I really like to attribute the unfolding of this work to a dear, dear beloved soul that came into my life in the form of a cat. And we connected because I was out doing some prayer work on a creek one day, and she just appeared out of nowhere, and I rescued her from going over a waterfall, and she ended up being my buddy, my travel buddy. And it was a time I was going through a lot of shifts and a lot of changes, and I was trying to understand some of these different pieces, and I hadn't quite unfolded all the code interpretation work at that point. And we set off, and we ended up leaving a 2,400 square foot home for a 24 square foot vehicle. And we toured the U.S. We did 1.5 trips around. She was a much older cat, as it turned out. And unfortunately, she passed away of kidney failure a little over a year ago. But the whole time she was with me, Steve, she was teaching me all of these codes without me knowing it. And while she was still with me, kind of over the last few months that she was with me, I had somebody that I knew that was doing some work on cold crime cases. And I said, well, I'm kind of doing this work now, and it's still blending over 50 different modalities of things, but it's got this focus where I can look at a name and I can start to draw information, and then I combine these Nordic energy patterns, and I'm bringing in, some numerology, but not traditional numerology, and let me see what I can figure out. Please, the gist of it. So I started working on these cold crime cases, and they kind of came back to me and they said, we'd like to know where you got the information you got that you gave us. And I said, what do you mean? And they go, well, this information you gave us, that's not exactly public news. And I go, oh. And they go, well, it's not only not public news, that's not even known between everybody internally. So we'd like to know where you got the information from. And I said, well, to me, it's clear as day. You gave me the name, and I went from there, and it's clear as day. So I was literally figuring out how the crimes occurred and solving their cases for them. And it was just, they didn't even know what to do with that. And I hadn't totally unfolded it, but I kind of kept working with it. And then as time went on, I knew I was on to something. And I was doing some things for other people, and they were like, wow, this is really incredible. This is like just so to the point and just so right in there. And people were like, I'm like, that's great. I'm glad it's working, And then my cat ended up with the kidney failure, and she passed, and it was heart-wrenching for me. I took 4 days just to be with her. And as I started reflecting back on all of the time we shared together, the places where she was happy and the places where she was unsettled and the things that she loved, and what she was showing me through all of her reactions, Steve, were how the codes worked. What was in flow, what wasn't. And I started looking at everything, and everything just clicked together.
Yeah.
And it was like, I get it. I get it. And even to this day, I still reflect back on things for insights with this. And as I did that, and it just unfolded, and before I knew it, here I was helping people code up the titles for their work and their websites and their shows and their, and their CD covers and song titles and all these different things. And it's interesting, the person I kind of started with just contacted me recently for some more cases.
Wow.
Matter of fact, just last night I was working on one with this, and I've learned that I can just tell the essence of the truth of anything in the world through this work, and it's part intuitive, and then it's part working with certain things. So,
is it predictive?
I can do some predicting with this, and I've been surprised. Matter of fact, I predicted the Super Bowl winner of this last February, whenever it was.
Yeah.
And I did it just for fun, because I was like, let me see if I could do this, and I did. And what it does is it kind of really pinpoints a vibrational flow of energy. Everything operates in an energy current.
Yes.
And everything is then going to be either compatible or not compatible with that energy current. And everything is going to be either coded or not coded. So what is compatibly coded is where our strongest divine flow of energy is. What is unfavorably coded to us is like that fatal attraction. We might still be drawn to it, but we can't let go of it, but it's not good for us. It's the heavy drama stuff.
Yes.
And so, through these different dynamics of things, I can tell what will work for somebody. I can look forward at a point in time, and a little different than astrology, because I'm not looking at the planets, but what I can do is I can pinpoint where somebody's energy flow will be, say on a particular day or in a particular location. Mm-hmm. And so that's where the predictive piece comes in, is how is that person's energy going to interact on that day and that location. And that's what I did with the Super Bowl teams, for example.
Right.
When I was playing around with that, I looked at the energy of each team, and then I looked at the energy of each team in that location and on that day. And one team came out prevalent. And it was very interesting. It was like, I never would have expected that team to win. It's like, well,
it's extremely interesting, because in my own work over the years as a medium, I've often been told by the guides that it's about understanding the flows of energy. And even in areas such as prediction, they always say, be aware of giving out too much in the form of predictions, especially long-term predictions, because over time energy flows change and ebb and all that sort of thing, and predictions can change. They're not set in stone.
And it's true. And if we have a name change or something like that along the way, then that is going to shift our energy current, and that could shift something in the future.
Yes.
What is interesting, and I've always kind of stayed away from the so-called prediction things, I try to put more of an influence on, here's the energy patterns available. Here's the day that when you go out and speak, people are going to be able to listen more. I'm sure you know as a medium that certain days you're going to be more accurate than other days. Well, those are the days that you are probably flowing or have a greater compatibility with, or a greater intuitive flow with, than the other days.
Yes.
As a speaker, if I'm going to do a show, if I'm going to come on somebody's show, if I'm going to go do a presentation, if I can make that work on a day that I'm favorably coded to, I'm going to be better received as a speaker than if I go on a day that I'm highly challenged by.
Yes.
In there, and not that I couldn't turn it around, because I believe I could, but it does make that difference. And for example, I did that when we released Embraced by the Divine. I helped Michelle pick the days that we would release the book and the timing and those sorts of things, right down to color and hex codes on the website, like that. And we did, and we released it at this time, and of course it hit international bestseller in multiple countries before it was even released.
Yeah.
So
totally successful, I would say.
Totally successful. And we did the same thing when we released the paperback, and we still work these things, because it's all about, it's just like if you're going to go someplace and you're going to talk to somebody, like let's say you had to go to court for some reason, whatever reason, right? You want to go on a day that your energy is going to connect with that judge.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And or one particular judge is the one that's ruling that day versus another judge. And if you have that choice, you're going to pick the judge that you think is going to be more in your favor. It's the same type of thing. If you're going to go see somebody, you're going to go see them normally, when they're in a mood to see you, and not when they're going to be irritated by you.
Indeed. Yeah.
So that's kind of the basics of the principles in there, but it's been such a beautiful gift, I guess, for me, because it takes so much of the guesswork out of things. It allows me to really see the essence and not be deceived by my eyes or my ears or my human senses in this process, where I can really see what the true energy is and how it's flowing.
I would also imagine that by being able to code yourself, you get a greater insight into yourself and those subconscious patterns that we all have.
Absolutely. And even looking at some of the patterns, like in our family names, for example. I remember working with a client, and she came to me because she was having really severe anxiety things, and she was one of the people. I said, well, let me see what I can find out. And when we delved into it and we got into her family name, we saw this huge struggle between material and spiritual worlds, and I could pinpoint that there were like alternating generations of one generation might be really spiritual, one really material focused, and that led to all kinds of things. And it opened up a whole realm of understanding about how her family worked and how that family energy perpetuated in her own life. So it does give us some of those deeper layers in there on things that I guess a lot of people would come back to me and they would say, wow, I've known that, but I it up that way. That sheds a whole new light for me. So it's like, Steve, if I was to take your name, for example, we'll just look at your first name.
Okay.
For the beginning point. And if I was to look at this, the energy current, this doesn't dictate how your whole pattern comes together, but it's one piece of you, and it's the piece that most people see you as. And when I look at that piece of you, what we find that a lot of people actually view you as probably a fairly successful person. They look at you and they say, you've come a long way. You've got things mastered. You've got things under control. Things tend to work out for you. Now, that doesn't mean that they always do, but that's what other people perceive when they see you.
Well, that's handy. That's certainly the sort of projection I'd like to have out there, yeah.
So you carry that solar kind of energy. You carry that energy that is bright. And I think a lot of people find that probably very relatable in many ways. And, certainly good for hosting shows and things like that as well. But there's a strong success component, and you're viewed that way by other people. And as you say, that can be a real benefit. Knowing something like that, you know that you're going to probably be the leader normally in a group of people, whether you are directly doing that or indirectly doing that. You probably guide things, where they go.
That has tended to be the case throughout my life, yes. Even when I try to stand at the back of the room, somehow I end up coming to the front.
Right. Certain amount of natural charisma there. And these are the things that can be important, because sometimes we could be doing all kinds of amazing things, but our energy current to the world might still be putting out there this sort of victim pattern. Or it could be putting out these different energy patterns. So understanding that that's how we're being viewed, we realize you're getting a lot of favorable energy, but it could also lead some people to maybe compete with you or things like that.
Sure.
And somebody that's in a victim pattern, here again, they could be in good spirits, but people are still viewing them as that down person, in the group. And so they have to, knowing that, they can find ways to work with that. They can find ways to shift that. It's when we don't know things, we can't make those shifts. But when we understand ourselves, then we understand what will work for us better. When we understand our flow, we can work with that.
Indeed, I completely agree. Jess, I'm just looking at the time here. I could keep talking to you all day, but we do have to call it. Maybe we could catch up again sometime down the track and do a follow-up. That would be wonderful if you're open to that.
Absolutely, I would love it.
Now, if people want to contact you to find out more about what you do, or maybe to consult with you, how can they best do that?
They can go through my website, which is compassioncodes.com. So very easy to locate there. They can send me a message through there, or they can email me, which will be Jang, Jang, it's all my initials, at compassioncodes.com.
Fantastic. Once again, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank
Many
you.
blessings.
Thank you.
Blessings to you too.
Bye.
Bye now.